My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 34 years old, and at my sister's bridal shower, my father lifted a glass in front of 40 people and said, "Evelyn would have wanted Avery to wear her dress." Everyone clapped. My stepmother smiled like the decision had always been settled. My sister Avery touched the lace at her shoulder and said, "Natalie can buy something new. She's always been practical." I looked at the ivory dress box on the gift table, the one my mother had stored for me when I was 16, the one with my name written in her handwriting under the lid. I did not stand up. I did not shout. I waited until Mrs. Callahan, the seamstress who had worked on every important dress my mother ever owned, walked through the side door carrying a smaller white envelope and a silver seam ripper. She placed the envelope beside the cake and said, "Before anyone says what Evelyn would have wanted, you should know what she stitched into the lining." My father's smile disappeared first. Avery looked confused. My stepmother reached for the dress box, but Mrs. Callahan put one hand on the lid and said, "No, Caroline. Not this time." Then she opened the bodice lining and pulled out my mother's note. It had been hidden in a hand-sewn pocket for 11 years. My name was on the first line. "Natalie, this dress is yours. Not because you stayed quiet, but because I saw every time they asked you to disappear." The room went silent. I still remember the sound of the ice shifting in my father's glass. I still remember Avery's fingers letting go of the lace. And I remember thinking that my mother had been gone for 8 years, but somehow she had chosen that exact room, that exact table, and that exact sentence to come back. Welcome back to Quiet Truth Stories. This one is for every person who was called strong when the family really meant convenient. If you have ever been told to give something up because someone else needed it more, drop one word in the comments that describes how that felt. And subscribe if stories about quiet truth, family pressure, and one piece of proof finding the light stay with you. Now let me take you back to the first time I understood that beautiful things in my family never stayed mine for long. I grew up in Ashford, Pennsylvania, in a brick split-level house with a narrow staircase, a sloped backyard, and a linen closet my mother kept organized like a small museum. My mother, Evelyn Brooks, believed fabric could hold memory. She kept christening gowns, school uniforms, old curtains, table runners, and the blue cardigan she wore home from the hospital after having me. She did not hoard. Everything was folded, labeled, and stored with cedar blocks. If something mattered, she wrote down why. My father, Richard, said she was sentimental. My mother said sentiment was history with fingerprints. My sister Avery was 3 years younger than me, and beautiful in a way that made adults soften before she spoke. She had wide blue eyes, soft blonde hair, and the kind of small voice that made people lean closer. When she cried, the house rearranged itself. When I cried, someone handed me a tissue and told me I was old enough to understand. That became the family rule before any of us named it. Avery needs beautiful things more than you do. Avery needs peace. Avery needs the front seat. Avery needs the bigger bedroom because she has trouble sleeping. Avery needs the last slice because she had a hard day. Natalie understands. That last sentence followed me through childhood like a second name. Natalie understands. Natalie doesn't mind. Natalie is mature. Natalie is strong. At 10, I gave Avery my birthday earrings because she cried that her ears looked plain in school photos. At 13, I gave her the solo in the church Christmas program because Dad said her confidence was fragile. At 16, I gave her the room with the dormer window because she said the slanted ceiling made her feel like a storybook character. My mother watched all of it with a face I did not understand then. Not approval, not helplessness exactly, a kind of quiet accounting. She would find me later, folding laundry or doing homework, and say, "You are allowed to want things, Natalie." I would shrug because wanting things made the room tense. She would touch my hair and say, "Wanting is not selfish." I wanted to believe her. I just did not know where to put the wanting once she said it. There was one more thing Mom did that nobody noticed. She kept a small notebook in the linen closet where she wrote who received what after birthdays, holidays, and funerals. Not legal records, just memory records. Pearl earrings to Avery, blue scarf to Natalie, recipe cards copied for both girls. I thought it was odd until years later, when I realized she had been living with a family that confused emotion with ownership. My mother understood that if no one wrote things down, the loudest person got to decide what love had meant. The dress entered my life the summer I turned 16. It had been my mother's wedding dress first, an ivory satin gown with tiny covered buttons down the back, lace sleeves, a fitted waist, and a skirt that moved like poured cream. In photographs, my mother looked almost startled by her own happiness wearing it. She had married my father in the church basement after a morning rainstorm. There was no ballroom, no string quartet, no 8-tier cake, just folding chairs, a borrowed veil, chicken salad sandwiches, and my father looking at her like he could not believe she had said yes. At least, that is how the pictures made it seem. Mom took the dress out of storage that July because Mrs. Callahan was retiring from bridal alterations and had offered to preserve a few final pieces for longtime clients. Mrs. Callahan's shop sat between a bakery and an insurance office downtown. It smelled like steam, starch, lavender sachets, and coffee that had been reheated too many times. She was a small woman with silver hair, black glasses, and pins always attached to her sweater cuff. She called every dress she, as if garments had personalities. "She needs room to breathe," she would say, lifting a hem. "She was cut for a nervous bride," she would say, examining darts. My mother trusted her with everything. I went with Mom to the shop, carrying the dress box in both hands. Avery had wanted to come, but she had a pool party. Dad said it was fine because Avery isn't really into old things. Mom did not answer. At the shop, Mrs. Callahan opened the box, lifted the tissue, and let the dress rise from it like something waking up. I touched one sleeve with one finger. "It's beautiful," I said. My mother watched me instead of the dress. "It is," she said. Mrs. Callahan smiled. "Someday this will be yours to decide about." I laughed because I was 16 and marriage felt like something that happened to other people in church bulletins. "Mine? Yours," Mom said. "If you want it. Not because you have to wear it. Because I want one thing in this family to wait for you." That sentence should have told me she knew more than she said. Instead, I rolled my eyes, embarrassed by the tenderness. Mrs. Callahan took measurements of the gown, made notes on a yellow pad, and showed Mom where the lining needed reinforcement. While she worked, Mom asked if a small inside pocket could be stitched into the bodice. "For a handkerchief?" Mrs. Callahan asked. Mom's answer was too quick. "Something like that." I remember standing by the mirror, looking at myself beside the dress, feeling oddly seen and oddly afraid. Beautiful things in our family moved toward Avery. That was gravity. For Mom to say something would wait for me felt like watching water run uphill. 2 years later, Mom got sick. Ovarian cancer. The kind that hides until it is tired of hiding. By then, I was 18, Avery was 15, and Dad had already learned to speak about illness like a scheduling inconvenience. He drove to appointments when he had to. I took notes. I learned medication names, insurance codes, where Mom kept her good scarves, how to read pain on her face before she admitted it. Avery visited the bedroom and cried into Mom's blankets. Dad would guide her out gently and say, "This is too much for your sister." I stayed and emptied basins. I stayed and called doctors. I stayed and pretended I was not afraid, because everyone had already assigned me the role of person who could handle it. One night, about 6 months before Mom died, she asked me to bring the ivory dress box from the top shelf of the linen closet. She was propped up in bed, thinner than any mother should look to her child, but her eyes were clear. I set the box beside her. "Open it," she said. I lifted the lid. On the inside, written in blue ink, was my name, Natalie. I stared at it. "When did you do that?" "The day we preserved it." Her voice was weak, but there was a smile inside it. "Mrs. Callahan has the paperwork too. Receipt, instructions, everything." I swallowed. "Mom, don't." "Listen to me." She reached for my hand. "Your father loves you. Avery loves you. But love does not always stop people from taking the easiest path. And the easiest path in this family has usually been through you." I started crying then, quietly, because I did not want to make her comfort me. She squeezed my hand. "If they ask you to give this away someday, I need you to remember that I did not." Mom did not ask me to promise I would wear it. That mattered later. She asked me to promise I would decide. "A gift that becomes an obligation is just another kind of debt," she whispered. "If you wear it because you want to feel me near you. If you don't, do not let anyone tell you grief has a dress code." At 18, I thought she was talking about weddings. She was talking about every future room where someone would try to use her absence as permission. Mom died in February, when the ground was frozen and the sky looked low enough to touch. The funeral was full of women from church, Dad's work friends, Avery's teachers, and relatives who told me I was brave because I passed out tissues without crying. People said Avery was devastated. They said Dad was lost. They said I was holding up so well. No one asked what it cost to be the person who held up. At the lunch afterward, Avery wore Mom's pearl earrings. Dad had given them to her that morning because she needed something of Mom's close to her. I wore Mom's cardigan under my coat and told myself fabric counted too. Mrs. Callahan came to the funeral and hugged me longer than anyone else. She whispered, "I have the dress file. Your mother made sure." I nodded, but grief is a fog. I heard the words without understanding how much they would matter. 2 years later, Dad married Caroline. She was not cruel in the cartoon way. She did not slam doors or call me names. Caroline's talent was agreement. She agreed with whatever made Dad comfortable. If Dad said Avery was sensitive, Caroline said Avery had a tender heart. If Dad said I was independent, Caroline said it was wonderful not to worry about me. If Dad said the house felt brighter when Avery visited, Caroline said some daughters just brought light. I became a guest in conversations about my own family. By then I lived in Philadelphia, worked as a project manager for a nonprofit housing group, and came home for birthdays, holidays, and emergencies. I still handled things: Dad's insurance renewal, Avery's college financial aid appeal, Caroline's computer issue, the family vacation rental that needed my credit card because Dad's was temporarily maxed. Every time I helped, I became less visible as a person and more useful as a function. Avery grew into the role the family had made for her. I do not say that with hatred. It is hard to become generous when everyone around you treats other people's sacrifices as proof of your worth. She learned to ask without asking. I wish I had something of Mom's for graduation. Dad gave her Mom's bracelet. I feel weird being the only one without help moving. I drove 3 hours and carried boxes. I don't know why Natalie gets so quiet around me. Caroline said I was just tired. Nobody said maybe I was tired because the family kept spending me like I was not limited. I met Daniel when I was 32. At a city grant workshop where the coffee was terrible and the projector died twice. He was an architect for a nonprofit building affordable senior housing, calm in a way that did not require anyone else to shrink. On our third date, he asked what I wanted without making the question feel like a trap. I almost did not know how to answer. We were engaged 15 months later on a Saturday morning in a public garden. No audience, no hired photographer, no dramatic speech. He gave me a ring with a tiny sapphire because I had once said blue made me feel like I could breathe. When I told Dad, he sounded pleased, then distracted. Caroline asked if we had set a date. Avery texted 12 heart emojis and then, 20 minutes later, asked if I thought it would be weird if she and her boyfriend Mason got engaged soon too. I should have seen it coming. Avery had never been comfortable letting anyone else have an unshared milestone. 6 weeks after my engagement, Mason proposed at a winery with both families present. Dad called me that night. Avery is over the moon, he said. Of course, I said. I'm happy for her. You sound flat. I closed my eyes. I'm tired. Try not to make this a competition, Nat. There it was. The accusation before I had committed the crime. I said goodnight and hung up before I said something true. For a while, I tried to make room for both weddings. Daniel and I planned a small ceremony for October at a restored train station near Philadelphia. Avery wanted summer, then spring, then suddenly September, because the venue she liked had a cancellation. Caroline started a group text called Brooks Brides, which made my skin tighten every time it lit up. Avery sent photos of flowers, cakes, shoes, champagne towers. I sent one picture of a simple invitation. Caroline replied, lovely and practical. Avery replied, cute. It was such a small word. It still managed to put me back in every room where I had been told not to need too much. In May, I called Dad and said I wanted to pick up Mom's dress the following weekend, so Mrs. Callahan could inspect it. There was silence on the line. Not confusion, delay. I recognized it immediately because I had heard it before. Every time someone had already decided something and was waiting to make me feel unreasonable for noticing. About the dress, Dad said. My hand tightened around the phone. What about the dress? He sighed. Avery has been very emotional about not having Mom here. Caroline and I think it would mean the world to her to wear it. I stood in my apartment kitchen with Daniel's coffee mug in the sink and watched rain slide down the window. Dad, I said slowly, Mom left that dress for me. She left it for the family. No, She wrote my name in the box, Natalie. He used the voice he used when I was 13 and asking why Jason's friend could stay for dinner but mine could not. Patient, disappointed, already certain. You know your mother. She would have wanted peace. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because peace in our family had always meant Avery got the object and I got the lesson. I'm coming Saturday, I said. Please don't make this ugly. I'm not making it anything. I'm picking up my dress. When I arrived that Saturday, the dress box was not in the linen closet. It was in the guest room, open, tissue pushed aside. Avery stood in front of the mirror, holding the gown against herself over leggings and a tank top. Caroline was kneeling near the hem with pins in her mouth. Dad stood in the doorway with his arms folded like a guard. For 1 second, nobody spoke. Then Avery smiled too brightly. Surprise? The room smelled like perfume and cedar. My mother's handwriting was visible under the lid. Natalie. Avery did not look at it. I walked to the box. Take it off. Avery's face crumpled instantly. I haven't even pinned anything yet. Caroline stood. Natalie, we were going to talk to you. After you started altering it? Dad said. No one altered anything. I looked at the pins in Caroline's hand. Then what is she holding? Avery's eyes filled. I just wanted to see if Mom would have looked like me. That sentence landed exactly where she aimed it. Dad moved to her side. Caroline touched her shoulder. The room arranged itself around her pain the way it always had. I felt 16 again, handing over earrings. 13, giving up a solo. 12, moving bedrooms. But this time, the dress had my name in ink. I said, Mom told me this dress was mine. Dad's jaw tightened. Your mother said many things when she was sick. I turned to him. Be careful. He looked startled. I had never used that voice with him. She was clear, I said. She had Mrs. Callahan preserve it under my name. Caroline's expression changed just enough for me to notice. She knew about paperwork. Maybe not all of it, but enough. Avery wiped her face. You always do this. I stared at her. Do what? Make me feel like I stole something when I just wanted one piece of Mom. The unfairness was so complete, it almost became impressive. Avery, you have Mom's pearls, bracelet, blue vase, recipe cards, and the locket Dad gave you after the funeral. Those aren't the same. No, they're yours now. Dad stepped between us. Enough. We are not itemizing grief. I looked at him. You started itemizing it the day you handed her Mom's earrings at the funeral and called me strong. Silence. Avery looked down. Caroline looked away. Dad's face went red, then pale. I closed the dress box carefully, took a photo of my name under the lid and said, I'm going to Mrs. Callahan. Dad said, Natalie, don't drag outsiders into this. I picked up my purse. Then stop making outsiders the only people who honor what Mom wrote down. Mrs. Callahan's shop was mostly closed by then. She did private alterations from a back room full of old dress forms and labeled boxes. When I walked in, she looked at my face and did not ask if I wanted tea. She just locked the front door. I told her what happened. She listened with both hands folded on the cutting table. When I finished, she went to a metal filing cabinet and pulled out a cream folder labeled Brooks, Evelyn, Preservation. Inside were receipts, alteration notes, a photo of the dress, and a page in my mother's handwriting. Transfer instructions. Ivory wedding gown preserved for Natalie Ann Brooks. Release only to Natalie or by Natalie's written permission. Mrs. Callahan placed the page in front of me. Your mother was not vague. I covered my mouth with one hand, not to cry loudly, to keep myself from making a sound I could not take back. Mrs. Callahan waited. Then she said, there is something else. She opened a small drawer and took out a white envelope sealed with tape that had browned at the edges. My name was written across it in Mom's handwriting. She asked me to keep this until the first time someone tried to take the dress from you. My knees weakened. I sat on the stool beside the fitting platform. She said that? Mrs. Callahan's mouth pressed into a line. Almost those exact words. Evelyn loved your family, Natalie, but she was not confused about them. I did not open the envelope right away. Sometimes proof is too heavy until you know where you are going to set it down. I took photos of the preservation record, the release instructions, and the receipt. Then Mrs. Callahan asked if the dress was still at my father's house. I nodded. Then we will retrieve it properly, she said. Not with a fight in a guest room, with witnesses. I looked up. Witnesses? Your sister's shower is next Saturday, isn't it? I had forgotten. Or maybe I had pushed it out of my mind because the invitation had said, "Please join us as Avery wears a piece of Evelyn's love." I had not answered. Mrs. Callahan tapped the folder. Your father has already told people what your mother wanted. Let your mother answer in the same room. The week before the shower, Dad called me 11 times. I answered once. He said Avery had cried for 2 days. He said Caroline thought I was being punishing. He said family did not need paperwork for everything. I said, "Then why are you afraid of the paperwork?" He hung up. Avery sent one long text that began with, "I can't believe you're doing this to me," and ended with, "I hope you're happy being right." I did not reply. There are messages designed not to communicate, but to pull you back into the role of apology. I had lived there too long. Daniel read the text while we sat at our kitchen table and said, "Do you want me to come Saturday?" I said no at first because I had been trained not to need backup. Then I stopped myself. "Yes," I said, "I do." He reached across the table and took my hand. No speech, no rescue fantasy, just presence. It felt unfamiliar enough to make me cry. The bridal shower was held in the fellowship hall of the church where my parents had married. White tablecloths, pink roses, cucumber sandwiches, a mimosa station, and a banner that said Avery's Day in gold letters. That banner told the truth more plainly than anyone realized. Avery stood near the gift table in a pale blue dress, glowing and nervous. The ivory dress box sat behind her on the side table, tied with a champagne ribbon. My mother's dress had been made into decoration before the question of ownership had been answered. Caroline kissed my cheek when I arrived and whispered, "Please don't ruin this." I whispered back, "Then you should have protected it." Her face hardened. Dad saw Daniel beside me and frowned, as if my fiancé's presence was an escalation instead of a basic courtesy. I sat near the back with the sealed envelope in my purse, and my mother's words still unread. For the first hour, I listened to women praise Avery. She looked like Evelyn. She had Evelyn's grace. She would be such a beautiful bride in Evelyn's gown. Every sentence tightened the room around my lungs. Daniel's knee touched mine under the table. Steady. I focused on the dress box, my name under the lid, Mom's ink. Mrs. Callahan arrived at 2:17, wearing a gray suit and carrying the cream file. The room shifted because older women in church halls recognize authority when it arrives with a folder. She greeted Aunt Marlene, nodded to Caroline, and stood beside the gift table. Dad moved quickly. "Margaret, this isn't a good time." Mrs. Callahan smiled politely. "Richard, it is the only appropriate time." He lowered his voice. "You are not family." She looked at the dress box. "No. I am the person Evelyn trusted when family became complicated." A few women stopped talking. Avery turned toward us. Caroline's hand tightened around her plastic champagne flute. Dad stepped to the front before anyone could ask questions. He tapped a spoon against his glass. "Everyone, I just want to thank you for loving Avery so well. Evelyn would be so moved to see her baby girl surrounded like this. And I know, truly, that she would have wanted Avery to wear this dress." People began to clap. Mrs. Callahan did not. Neither did I. Dad continued, "Natalie has been generous in understanding that grief touches everyone differently." I felt Daniel's hand move toward mine, but I did not take it, not yet. Avery's eyes shone. "Thank you, Natalie," she said across the room. "I know Mom would be happy." That was the moment Mrs. Callahan placed the cream file on the table. "Actually," she said, clear enough for the back row, "Evelyn left written instructions." The clapping stopped unevenly, like rain ending on a metal roof. Dad said, "Margaret." Mrs. Callahan ignored him and opened the file. "I want to pause here because this is the moment families count on." The room was public enough to shame me, but not public enough, they thought, for me to answer. That is why people make announcements at showers, dinners, birthdays, and funerals. They trust politeness to do what pressure could not. If you have ever been trapped by a room full of people expecting you to smile while something was taken from you, write "the room knew" in the comments. Because rooms do know. They just wait to see who is brave enough to name it. On July 19th, 11 years ago, Evelyn Brooks preserved her wedding dress through my shop. She paid the preservation invoice in full. She signed a release instruction naming Natalie Ann Brooks as the intended recipient. Caroline said, "That was years ago." "Yes," Mrs. Callahan said, "that is how records work." A laugh almost escaped me. I swallowed it because the room was too tense for humor, even deserved humor. Mrs. Callahan lifted a copy of the release page. "It states that the gown may be released only to Natalie or by Natalie's written permission." Avery looked at Dad. "You said Mom left it to us." Dad's face had gone stiff. "Your mother wanted unity." Mrs. Callahan turned the page. "Your mother wanted clarity." Then she looked at me. "Natalie, may I open the box?" My mouth was dry. "Yes." She untied the champagne ribbon, lifted the lid, and turned it so everyone close enough could see the name inside. Natalie, in my mother's blue ink. Someone whispered, "Oh." Avery took one step back. Mrs. Callahan lifted the dress gently, not all the way out, just enough to reach the inside bodice lining. Evelyn also asked me to stitch a small pocket here and seal a note inside it. She said the pocket should only be opened if the dress was claimed by someone else. She took out the silver seam ripper. Dad said, "Stop." His voice was not loud, but it was sharp enough to make several women flinch. Mrs. Callahan looked at him over her glasses. "No." One word. Calm. Final. She opened the tiny stitches. Not dramatic. Careful. A surgeon of fabric. From the pocket, she withdrew a folded sheet of thin blue paper. My mother's paper. I recognized it from grocery lists, permission slips, birthday notes, and the labels in the linen closet. Mrs. Callahan handed it to me. My hands shook. "Would you like to read it?" she asked. I could not. Not yet. I handed it back. "Please." Mrs. Callahan unfolded the note and read in a voice steady enough to hold all of us. "Natalie, if this note is being read, then someone has tried to make you smaller on a day when you should have been allowed to stand in your own light. I am sorry I did not stop it more often while I was here. I saw the earrings, the bedroom, the Christmas solo, the way people praised you for giving up what they never should have asked for. I saw every time you swallowed a want before it became a sentence. This dress is yours, not because Avery is loved less, not because you are loved more, because I am your mother too, and I will not let the family turn your quiet into permission after I am gone." The room was completely silent. Mrs. Callahan's voice softened, but it did not break. "If you choose not to wear it, that is your choice. If you choose to cut it, dye it, save it, sell it, or leave it in a box forever, that is your choice. But it is not a peace offering. It is not a consolation prize for someone else's tears. It is not proof that you are kind enough to disappear. I stitched this note into the lining because fabric remembers what people deny. Stand tall, my girl. Love, Mom." Mrs. Callahan lowered the paper. I did not realize I was crying until Daniel handed me a napkin. Avery was crying too, but differently. Not the full room grief that used to move furniture. Quietly, confused, maybe ashamed. Dad stared at the floor. Caroline was the first to try to recover the old order. "Evelyn was sick," she said softly, the voice people use when they want cruelty to sound careful. We all know emotions were high near the end. Mrs. Callahan closed the dress box halfway and looked at her. This note was written 3 years before her diagnosis. Caroline's mouth shut. That detail landed hard because it removed the family's favorite escape. They could not call my mother confused, sentimental at the end, or manipulated by illness. She had seen us clearly while still healthy. She had planned calmly. She had put thread where argument could not reach. Dad rubbed his forehead. "I didn't know about the note." I said, "You knew about the name." He looked at me then, really looked. Maybe for the first time that day. "Natalie, I was trying to avoid hurting Avery." I held the napkin in both hands. "So you hurt me where no one could see and called it peace." Avery made a small sound. Dad turned toward her automatically. Avery stood near the roses. "Dad," she said, "did you know it said Natalie in the box?" He did not answer fast enough. She closed her eyes. "You did." Caroline moved toward her. "Sweetheart, we were trying to give you something special." Avery opened her eyes. "By taking it?" That was the first time I had ever heard my sister ask a question that did not assume the room would protect her from the answer. Dad said, "It was your mother's dress." Avery whispered, "It was Natalie's too." The hall shifted, not dramatically. No one gasped, but something old lost balance. Mrs. Callahan slid another paper from the folder. "There is also the matter of the wedding fund." Dad's head snapped up. "Margaret, that is not your place." My stomach dropped. I had not known about a wedding fund. Mrs. Callahan looked at me. "Your mother left a cashier's check with my shop file for $12,000. It was to be used for Natalie's wedding alterations, preservation, or any wedding expense she chose. Richard picked it up after Evelyn passed, saying he would deposit it into an account for you." I stared at Dad. The room blurred at the edges. "What?" Dad's face had changed from defensive to cornered. "It was used for family expenses," Caroline said quickly. "After Evelyn died, things were complicated." Mrs. Callahan handed me a copy of the receipt. "Received by Richard Brooks. Purpose: Natalie Wedding Fund. Amount: $12,000. Dad's signature at the bottom. My father had not only tried to give Avery the dress, he had taken the money Mom left for me and hidden that too. I asked one question: where did it go? Dad looked at the women in the hall, then at Avery, then at me. "Avery's venue deposit," he said finally. Avery stepped back as if he had pushed her. "You used Natalie's money for my venue? I was going to replace it. When?" Dad did not answer. There are questions that do not need answers because silence has already done the paperwork. I sat down because my legs were no longer interested in dignity. Daniel stood behind me, one hand on the back of my chair. He did not speak for me. That mattered. Mrs. Callahan placed the note, receipt, and release instructions in front of me. "I am sorry," she said. "Your mother tried to prevent exactly this." I touched the edge of the blue note. She did. Then I looked at Dad, and you walked around her anyway. The shower ended without anyone announcing it. Women started gathering purses. Aunt Marlene hugged me and whispered that she had always wondered. That did not help as much as people think it helps. Wondering is not the same as helping. Caroline cried in the corner with two of her friends. Dad stood near the coffee urn, alone for once. Avery approached the table slowly. "Natalie." I looked at her. She looked younger than 31 in that moment. Not innocent, younger. "I didn't know about the money." "I believe you." Her face crumpled, but she held herself together. "I knew about the name in the box. Dad said Mom wrote it before she knew what I would need." That sentence hurt more than I expected. Not because Avery believed it, because Dad had handed her a version of our mother where my name could be explained away by her need. "And you accepted that?" I asked. She nodded once, small, miserable. "I wanted to." That honesty did not fix anything, but it gave us a clean place to stand. Avery looked at the dress box. "I'm sorry." It was the first apology she had ever given me that did not include the word but. I nodded. "Thank you." She wiped her face. "Are you going to wear it?" I looked at the dress. For years, I had imagined wearing it because it was Mom's, but sitting there with the note exposed and the room still warm from betrayal, I understood something I had not before. The dress mattered, but my choice mattered more. "I don't know yet," I said. Avery nodded like that answer cost her something and she was trying to pay. "Okay." Then she walked away without asking for comfort. I noticed. So did Daniel. Dad did not call me for 4 days. Caroline sent one text: "Your father is devastated." I deleted it. Devastation is not the same as accountability. On the 5th day, Dad came to Philadelphia. He did not ask if he could. He texted from the lobby of my apartment building like arrival was permission. Daniel was at work. I considered not going downstairs. Then I put my mother's note in a folder, took the elevator, and met him in the lobby where he could not mistake my home for his territory. He looked tired, unshaven, smaller than he had at the shower. He held a bank envelope. "I brought a check," he said. $12,000. I did not take it right away. "Where did you get it?" "I borrowed against the house line." "So you replaced stolen money with debt." He flinched. "Natalie, is it from you? Or is it another family problem with my name on it?" He looked down. "It's from me." I took the envelope. "Good." He waited, maybe for gratitude. I gave him none. "I thought your mother would want Avery happy," he said. "Mom wrote what she wanted. A note and a dress isn't the whole of a person." "No, but neither is Avery's sadness." His mouth tightened. I continued. "You keep using grief like a ladder to reach whatever you already wanted." He looked older again. "I failed you." I appreciated the sentence and did not rush to rescue him from it. "Yes." He nodded once. "Can I come to your wedding?" For the first time, he asked instead of assuming. "I don't know," I said. Pain crossed his face. "That's honest. You should practice sitting with it." I deposited the check into a separate account the next morning. Not for my wedding at first. just to remove it from family weather. Then I called Mrs. Callahan and scheduled a fitting. Not to decide yet, but to see the dress on my body without Avery, Dad, or Caroline in the room. The shop was quiet when I arrived. Mrs. Callahan had steamed the gown and hung it near the mirror. My mother's note lay in a protective sleeve on the table. "We can alter it gently," she said, "or not at all." I stepped into the dress behind the curtain. The satin was cool against my skin. The sleeves were a little tight. The waist needed letting out. My mother had been shorter than me. Different body, different life. Mrs. Callahan pinned without speaking much. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see my mother exactly. I saw the space between us. Her dress, my shoulders. Her stitches, my breath. I cried then. But not the way I had cried at the shower, softer, private. Mrs. Callahan stood behind me and said she would not have wanted the dress to become another obligation. I nodded. I know. Then I said the thing that had been forming since the shower. "Can we remove some of the lace from the sleeves and make a ribbon from it?" Mrs. Callahan smiled. "For your bouquet?" "For the inside of the dress," I said. "A new pocket. I want to add my own note someday." She nodded. Fabric remembers what people deny. It can also remember what people choose. Avery postponed her wedding by 6 months, not because I asked her to, because Melissa, her maid of honor and best friend, told her she needed time to figure out whether the wedding she was planning belonged to her or to the family's panic. Avery called me 3 weeks after the shower. I almost did not answer. When I did, she said, "I'm in therapy." I sat down. "Okay. I keep wanting you to tell me I'm good for doing that." There was the old honesty again. Awkward but real. "I'm not going to parent you through becoming accountable," I said. She let out a shaky laugh. "My therapist said you might not." I smiled despite myself. She continued, "I found Mom's locket in my jewelry box, the one Dad gave me after the funeral. I think it should be yours half the year." I closed my eyes. The old me would have said, "No, keep it, it's fine. Don't make a scene inside yourself. Send it in September," I said. Avery was quiet. "Really?" "Yes." "Okay." That was how we began. Not with a hug in a church hall, not with a speech, with a calendar for a locket and 2 sisters learning that fairness feels awkward when one of you has been overfed and the other has been praised for hunger. Caroline did not change as quickly. She believed the shower had been humiliating. She believed Mrs. Callahan should have spoken privately. She believed I had allowed strangers to judge our family. I told her the strangers had judged what the family did, and there was a difference. She did not like that. Dad started sending monthly payments toward the interest on the money he borrowed to repay me, even though I had not asked. Maybe guilt needed a schedule. Maybe paper was finally teaching him a language Mom had spoken for years. I kept each receipt, not because I wanted to build another case, because records had become how I let truth rest without holding it in my hands all day. Daniel and I kept our October wedding. Small ceremony, restored train station, 70 people, not 200, blue flowers, not roses. No champagne tower. I wore my mother's dress, but altered. The sleeves were lighter. The waist fit me. The new inside pocket held 2 notes, Mom's original in a protective sleeve, and a small card I wrote the night before the wedding. "Mom, I am wearing it because I choose to, not because they left me no other way to feel close to you." I folded it once and placed it beside hers. Mrs. Callahan cried when she buttoned the dress. Daniel cried when he saw me, but quietly, like the moment belonged to both of us, and he did not need to perform it for the room. Dad came alone. Caroline said she had a headache. Avery came in a navy dress and brought the locket in a small velvet pouch. "September," she whispered, placing it in my hand. I wore it around my bouquet, not around my neck. That felt right. At the reception, Dad asked for a dance. I almost said no. Then I thought of Mom's note, not as pressure but as permission. Choice can include generosity when it is not demanded. I danced with him for 1 song. Halfway through, he said, "Your mother would be proud." I looked at him. "Of me?" His eyes filled. "Of you." It was the first time he said it without turning the sentence into something about Avery, family, or peace. I let myself receive it. Only that. Not a full pardon. Not a rewritten childhood. 1 sentence. Sometimes healing is not a door thrown open. Sometimes it is a small window unlocked in a room that has been sealed for years. The $12,000 did not all go to the wedding. Daniel and I paid for alterations, photography, and a few things that mattered to me. The rest sat untouched until December, when my 16-year-old cousin Lily called. Lily was Aunt Marlene's daughter, quiet, talented, always sketching dresses in the margins of church bulletins. She had been accepted into a summer design program in New York, but Aunt Marlene said the family needed help with her younger brothers and that expensive dreams could wait. I heard the sentence and felt the old rule lift its head. Avery needs beautiful things more than you do, had a cousin. Family needs your hands more than your future. I asked Lily how much the deposit was. She whispered, $800. I paid it that night from the remaining wedding fund and sent her a screenshot before anyone could talk her out of wanting it. Then I called Aunt Marlene and said, Lily is going. We can discuss logistics, not permission. She sputtered. I did not. Lily sent me a photo from the program in July. She stood in front of a dress form, hair pulled back, measuring tape around her neck, smiling like she had just discovered oxygen had a shape. I forwarded the photo to Avery. She replied, she looks like Mom in the shop. Then, a minute later, she wrote, I'm glad you paid it. That may sound small, but in our family, a sister being glad that another girl got something, instead of asking what it cost her, was not small. It was a new seam. Avery's wedding happened the following spring. She did not wear Mom's dress. She chose a simple silk gown with square straps and no lace. Dad paid for part of it after selling his old fishing boat. She told me that detail herself, without apology in her voice, just information. Before walking down the aisle, she handed me Mom's locket in the bridal room. Hold this during the ceremony? She asked. For both of us? I nodded. She looked nervous, not fragile. There is a difference. After the ceremony, she hugged me and said, I'm sorry I let them make your things feel negotiable. I said, I'm sorry I waited so long to stop negotiating myself. She laughed through tears. We were not fixed, but we were not performing the old roles perfectly anymore, and that mattered. The dress lives in a new preservation box now, not at Dad's house, not in Caroline's closet, in my apartment, on the top shelf of the guest room closet, labeled in my handwriting and Daniel's, because he said family history should not rely on one woman's filing system. Inside the box are the dress, Mom's note, my note, the release instructions, a photo from my wedding, a photo of Lily at her design program, and a small scrap of lace Mrs. Callahan saved for me. On the inside lid, I wrote one sentence. This belongs to the person named by the woman who saved it. Maybe someday I will have a daughter. Maybe I won't. Maybe the dress will go to Lily, or Avery's future daughter, or no one. The difference is that the next choice will be made by asking, not taking. My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 34 years old. My father and stepmother gave my mother's wedding dress to my sister because they thought my quiet was the same as consent. They told a room full of women that my mother would have wanted peace, while my mother's own handwriting waited inside the lining to disagree. The seamstress opened a pocket no one knew existed, and for the first time in my life, the room had to hear what I had been too trained to say. This dress is mine, not because Avery is loved less, not because I am loved more, because I am allowed to receive something without turning it into proof that I am kind enough to lose it. That is my story. One ivory dress box, one stitched note, one mother who saw the pattern and left thread where denial could not reach. If this story reminded you of something you gave away before you were ready, or something someone called family peace when they really meant your silence, tell me in the comments. I read them. If you know a Natalie, a Lily, or a girl who keeps being praised for needing nothing, share this with her. Like this video if you believe being strong should never mean being erased. And subscribe to Quiet Truth Stories for more emotional family drama stories about hidden truth, quiet strength, and the moment one piece of proof changes everything. I'll see you in the next story. I still think about the small pocket Mrs. Callahan opened. Such a tiny thing, almost invisible from the outside. Strong enough to hold a truth for 11 years. Sometimes protection does not look like a grand speech. Sometimes it looks like a mother asking for one extra seam, a woman keeping a file in a metal cabinet, a daughter finally refusing to turn her own name into a family donation. You are allowed to keep what was meant for you. You are allowed to choose generosity without being drafted into sacrifice.